Tonight's speaker is Heine. Anne is an independent educational consultant working with families across the country to demystify and de-stress the college admissions process. Her passion is giving families the tools to manage the complex college process, and she loves to show students how to turn their hard work in high school into powerful essays and effective applications. She is a graduate of Georgetown University and obtained her MBA from the University of Maryland. She has a certificate in college counseling from UCLA, has two boys, one in high school and one in college, and lives in Northern California. Welcome, Anne. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Gina. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the La Quinta community about college because it's a topic I'm really passionate about. So what we talked about covering today is a number of the issues that come up oftentimes in my practice with the students and the families that I work with. So we are going to leave time for questions at the end, but I'm going to go through a number of slides that just talk about some of the primary issues that come up when I'm working with my families. So I'm going to just share my screen so that you can see the slides. There we go. So this information is suited both for students and for parents. Both of you will get something out of this, and I'm going to cover basically 4 areas. And these are the things that come up all the time in my practice. They really are the core pieces to college planning. And the first is planning for college, knowing what it is that what you need to know when you're getting started thinking about college. Paying for college, that is a super hot button, especially with parents, because college is a huge investment and it's very expensive, and nobody wants to pay more than they need to for it, and we're all looking for ways to make college more affordable. Applying to college, that's what my seniors are working on right now. Most of them are in the end part of that. They're finishing that process, but that's a whole piece of the puzzle all on its own. And then once a student gets to college, it's good to talk about what are the skills that you're going to need in order to be successful once you're there. So the college process seems pretty mysterious and complicated because things have changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, especially with the advent of the internet. So we're going to talk about some of the misconceptions that come up in each of these 4 topics. And I'm going to try to lay out for you some of the things I think it would be helpful for students and families to know. Okay, so let's talk about planning for college. Colleges are trying to admit students who are prepared for college. And so what does that look like? What they are hoping for is students that have increased the rigor in their coursework over time and that their grades improve. So oftentimes students have difficulty going from 8th grade to 9th grade, because junior high is very different from the high school environment. And so colleges expect, in some cases, that there's going to be a drop in the grades, or that freshman grades are going to be somewhat lower. So they expect to see that. But what they expect to see also is that from 9th through 12th, the courses are going to get harder, and there's going to be also grades that are improving over time, because the goal is they want to make sure students are prepared for the work when they get to college. So they're looking for students who are actually ready to do college work, and that's where choosing things like AP classes comes in. And colleges will look for a natural course progression. So if they see Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then they see something like Statistics, or they see something that there's no math on the 4th year, they might have a question for a student about why that was the progression that was put together. So when a student is putting together their application, they need to look through the eyes of the admissions officer and make sure that the courses that they're working on and that they're taking are in a natural progression for that course. And you can talk to your college counselor about that in high school. And if they make any choices that are sort of out of the ordinary, there's a place in the application to identify that. Colleges also are looking for students who are engaged in the classroom. That's super important because that's what you're going to be required to do to be successful in college, is really get involved. It's also a really important thing because those teachers are going to be the ones that are going to write recommendations when you get to the college application process. And so making sure you're curious and talking to your teachers is really going to be important, not only for your application, but when you get to college, it's one one way to make sure you can be successful. Colleges, when they look at a student's application, they want students who are going to be interesting. So I hear a lot about parents saying, well, I want my student to be well-rounded because that's what's attractive to colleges. Well, the fact of the matter is that colleges are trying to create a well-rounded class. They're not looking for well-rounded students. They're actually looking for interesting and distinctive students. So it's really okay if a student is what we call pointy, which means they really focus in one area. Maybe they're the best trombone player in the school, or maybe they are super into robotics and moms and dads are worried because they don't have a job or they're not doing something else and they're not in 5 or 6 other clubs. And that is really okay. Colleges love to see persistence and passion in a student, and they don't really want students that are doing a little bit of everything just for the college application. And then the last part is colleges want to admit curious students, right? They're hoping that a student, when they enter the college environment, is going to take full advantage of all of the things that are offered by that college. So they're going to be looking for students who are asking questions about the environment that they're in. They're looking to solve problems where they are, and they're choosing activities that allow them to explore those curiosities that they have. Okay, so the takeaway from this is when you're planning for college and you're looking at your high school environment, that you want to take the hardest schedule you possibly can, but still get good grades. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. Just as a side note, know that when colleges take a look at students and their applications, they are going to be reviewing them in the context of their high school. So what that means is if a student's applying to, say, Baylor University, Baylor is going to take all of the applications from the student's high school, and then they're going to look at something called the school profile, which is a document that's provided by the counseling department at the high school. And it will tell how many AP courses are offered at that high school and any limitations and taking those AP classes. Also things like what is the grading, how many students get free lunch, what's the demographic of the particular high school, because the college is going to be looking at the applicant within the context of the high school. So for example, if the high school that your student is attending doesn't allow AP courses taken by freshmen, they aren't going to be compared apples to apples to a student who is in an environment where students have no limits on how many APs they can take. So it's important to kind of understand that so that you don't worry about a student being compared to another student in a different environment. Colleges assume students don't have very much choice about where they go to high school. And so they're going to look at them in the context of that environment. And they're going to look to see, did they max out on what was available in that particular educational environment? Okay, so we're going to move on to paying for college. So there's a couple of things that are really important for parents to know, and students too, about paying for college. And the first is that the whole system assumes that parents are going to be the primary source of college support for a student. And that the way that the system is set up is that in-state tuition at a public university is set at a price, and whether it's realistic or not, we could debate that, but it's considered the most affordable option, right? So that it's set so that parents should be able to afford that. And I know that that's often not the case. So that's where financial aid comes in. Financial aid is aid that's offered on the basis of need by the federal government and sometimes also by the college, depending on the college. The way that you get financial aid is that you have to file an application called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, also known as the FAFSA. And that is what the numbers that you put into that are all of the income numbers and the numbers that come from your tax return. That information is used to calculate need. So need is defined by the government. It's not defined by what we have in our bank account or what we have planned to spend for our students' college education. but it is literally dependent on a calculation that the government does through this application. And that's how aid is determined. And so it's really important to know that this isn't about what you can actually afford, what you think you can afford, or what you might have available, but financial aid or need-based aid is really determined by what the government considers an appropriate amount of income, and then they'll make some assumptions based on that. So oftentimes we want to talk about what the other source of aid is as well, because one of the questions I get all the time is, well, what about scholarships? My students should get scholarships from outside sources and that will help pay for college. So my advice always is that you should go to the most generous source of aid possible. And the most generous source of aid is actually the colleges themselves. They give out what's called merit aid, and merit aid is separate from financial aid, which is need-based. Merit aid is aid that is given to a student or offered to a student based on some quality that they bring to the equation that the college values. So it might be an athletic scholarship, it might be an academic scholarship, and merit aid falls, all those things fall under the merit aid umbrella. And merit aid is often offered to students who are good academically within the context of the college. And that's considered a reward by the institution. It's really a discount off of the tuition rate. And lots of colleges have their merit aid guidelines on their website. So that there are some colleges that actually literally have a chart that says, if you have this GPA and you apply and you have this test score, and some of the test score stuff is changing, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they literally will say, here's how much you can get for that. Some other things to be thinking about, are there other ways to pay or get a discounted rate of tuition at college? And one of the biggest for students who come from California is something called WUI, which is the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And the Western Undergraduate Exchange is a consortium of colleges that are on the Western states, but that also includes states like North Dakota and South Dakota. That offer a discount to the other members of the consortium. So what that means in real terms is if you send your student to, say, Northern Arizona University, and you are a California resident, you will pay, instead of the out-of-state rate at Northern Arizona, you will pay 150% of the in-state rate, which oftentimes is a whole lot less than definitely a private university in any state, or sometimes a public California university with an in-state tuition. So it's really important to look at the options that fall under the Western Undergraduate Exchange if you are a resident of California. So there's a website for that. It's Western Undergraduate Exchange, or WUE. And just Googling it, you can find that out. Or if there's a college that your son or daughter is interested, or you are interested in, and you just Google the name of the college and WUE, it will tell you whether they are part of that or not. Some really popular colleges that you might think would be associated with WUE are not. And then the other caveat is that some majors are also not qualified for WUE at some schools. So it really just depends on the school and what they decide is their level of participation. One other piece of information about paying for college as you're thinking about this, it's really important as your student is making a list of colleges to examine the 4-year and the 6-year graduation rates. And so why is that important? Well, if you're looking at a public university that has low tuition and the 4-year graduation rate is really low, that means you are likely going to pay for at least a 5th year and sometimes a 6th year in order to get your student out of that university. And that's important because that sometimes can take away the big discount of having a in-state tuition. So you need to take into consideration what the graduation rates are. And if your student falls in love with a university that has a low graduation rate, and I'm talking about like below 50%, below 25%, and yes, there are a lot of schools that have those numbers, it's definitely reason to ask the college what's behind that information. Why is it that the graduation rate is so low? And then if the student still wants to go, make sure that you are highlighting with that student to make sure they go take advantage of academic counseling to make sure they stay on track to graduate, even if a number of the percentage of the other students are not going to be on track to graduate in 4 years. Okay, so the takeaway here for paying for school is it's really important to set a budget. You're really shopping for college. Know in advance what it is you have available to spend, know what the government is going to expect you to participate with in terms of your finances. Definitely explore community college. In California, it's free. I can't get better than that. Transfer out to the University of California system from the community college system is really strong. That's a big advantage here in our state. And then look at private and out-of-state options, because oftentimes, either with merit or with something like the WUI, it can be much more affordable than staying in state. Okay, let's talk about applying to college. As soon as a high school student enters high school, they are really considered a college applicant. And it's really important to keep in mind all the tools and talents and tips and tricks that they're going to be referring to and needing as they start the application process. The first one is something that a lot of students don't really know about, and that's called demonstrated interest. So what's demonstrated interest? Demonstrated interest is one factor that some colleges use to decide whether or not they admit a student. So it might surprise you to know that colleges use a big list of very different categories in order to make decisions about applicants. And each college is different, and they use different metrics, and they have, even if it's the same list of things that are important, they vary in their importance to each college. And this information is available. You can find it out if you look at what's called the common data set for a college. It will tell what are the criteria that the college is using to make its decision. And at the bottom of the list is something called level of applicants' interest. So why would this be important? Well, colleges want to offer admission to applicants who are likely to say yes. It's sort of like asking somebody out to prom. You want to ask somebody that you think might actually say yes, because that feels good. For the college, it not only feels good, but it looks good to them. And it shows the strength of their brand. And it actually comes out in a number, which is called yield. Yield is the percentage of students who apply, are accepted, and say yes to the invitation to come to the university. And yield is often used as one of the things that measure colleges in rankings. So colleges rank higher when their yield is higher. And that makes sense, because the more students who say yes to the invitation means theoretically it's a better school, it's more in demand. And so therefore their ranking goes higher. So students will do themselves a huge favor if they show interest in a college. Well, how do you do that? What you do is you follow them on Instagram, you email them. On every college's website, it'll say, contact us for more information, sign up for their newsletter. Not just sign up for the newsletter, but open the email that comes from the university, click on the links. And a student would probably be doing this anyway because they're curious about the university and they want to know more about it. But it really works to the student's advantage to do this, because colleges track this information and they will look to it. If this is something that they use in their decisions, they will look at the numbers and sometimes make decisions based on the level of interest of a student. So that's a tip that I give you that not a lot of students understand or know about. Okay, we're going to move to testing. So there's been a lot of conversation lately about the SAT and the ACT. So a couple of points. One is colleges don't care whether you submit the SAT or the ACT. They are completely test agnostic when you submit a test. I just talked to a student yesterday who said, are you sure? Because some of my friends said that, no, the colleges don't care whether you submit the SAT or the ACT. So I recommend that students take a practice test in both, because the tests are very different and a student might have a preference or perform better on one test or the other. Then comes the issue of test optional. So when COVID hit, a lot of students weren't able to get a test. They weren't able to sit for a test, especially in California, or test areas, test centers were closed because they were schools and none of us were in person. So in that event, a lot of schools decided that they weren't going to require a test as part of the admissions process where they had before. So now most colleges have two pathways. They have a test optional pathway, or you can submit a test score or scores. And they have admissions in both directions. And the question I get a lot right now is that going to continue? And my guess would be the answer is yes, for the most part, because what happened when colleges went test optional is that the total number of applications generally to most colleges went up. And when you consider that a college charges a student between $50 and $80 per application, that's a big moneymaker for them. It also has an impact on rankings, because what happens when you have more applications and the same size freshman class, you're turning away more students, and that makes you look more selective. So I think that's going to continue. My recommendation for students is that they take a practice test in both, figure out which one they do best in, take that one officially at least 2 times, because the first time you take it, you might get totally wigged out because it's a big test. It's 3.5 hours. And, it's important, right? It's the first time you'll have taken it. Take it a second time, because then it's more familiar to you. You can relax a little bit. I often even suggest that you take it 3 times, because by that point, you've got a test score you're pretty happy with, but you're really familiar with the test at that point. And then as you're looking at your colleges, decide whether you submit the test score or not. Then you can look at what the ranges are for the accepted students who submitted test scores, to see whether it's an additive to your application. Does it add a positive, or would it be not so positive to add it? And then you could decide, do I go test optional or do I not go test optional? And it's really great that there are those options, because some students just don't really test that well. So the takeaway here is you want to show your very best self to colleges when you apply. Choose the test score choose the test that best advantages you. Show interest in the colleges that you are interested in. Make sure that they know you're interested in. And the other piece would be submit early. And there we want to talk about the couple of different decision choices when you do the applications. So submitting early is really important, because it also shows interest to the colleges. And there's 2 or 3 ways that you can do that. So the college deadlines are during senior year. They're either going to be in the November to December timeframe, or they're going to be in the January and February timeframe. In November, you have 2 options generally. One is called early action, and one is called early decision. Early action is you apply early, generally before by November 1 or November 15, depending on the school. And it means you apply early, you get a response from the college early, so generally before Christmas. It depends on the school, but that's generally the case. And you know ahead of time that you've been accepted to a university. So all the students in my practice have already been accepted to at least one school. And it kind of takes the pressure off. Like, okay, I know I have got a couple more schools I've got to apply to, but I got this one. And I know if nobody else accepts me, this is the school I'm going to go to. Then there's early decision. Again, early deadline. You submit early, you hear back from the college early. The difference between early action and early decision is that early decision is binding. It's a contract. If you apply early decision, you say, I will go to this school if they accept me. So the only reason you would use early decision if you are totally in love with a school and you're planning on not applying to any of the University of California schools, because you think about the timing. If you have to apply early decision on November 1, but you really want to know whether you're going to get into, say, Berkeley or UC Davis or Merced or Irvine, you are applying there by November 30, and you won't know until March whether you've been accepted. So if you really want to hold on to, I want to see what happens with my University of California applications, early decision is not a great idea. The University of California system only offers one deadline, and that is November 30. So it's important to kind of keep in mind as you're looking at your college list, it's kind of strategy. Like if I really love a school and I know I would want to go there, early decision is a great choice because it definitely tells a college you're interested, right? You're guaranteed to, if they accept you, you're 100% yield. You are absolutely going to go there. But it's also, it can be challenging because once you hear from an early decision school, if you're accepted, you have to withdraw all your other applications. And that makes sense because you're not a candidate for them any longer and you want to make sure other students have that spot. But if you're a student or you have a student who's really interested to see, hey, where can I get in? Early decision might not be a good way to go. One last comment about early decision. Early decision is very popular with colleges. Again, because it's a guarantee for them. They are, some cases, filling up to 50% of the freshman class with early decision students. So that information is also available. So if it's, as you're thinking about your list and you're trying to figure out, do I want to go early action or early decision? It makes sense to take all those different pieces of information into consideration as you're trying to make that choice. Okay, so the last piece of this is succeeding in college. And when I work with students, one of the first things we talk about is how different college is from high school. Students are really surprised at that, that college is, first of all colleges don't work the same way. They don't all call the same major, the same word. They don't all have the same term. Some of them work on trimesters, some on quarters, some on a block schedule. So it's really important to understand how different these colleges are from one another. And college is going to be really an independent process for a student. So I work with students to make sure that they're developing skills early on so that when they are off at college, they're able to manage that. So what are we talking about? So these are things that make perfect sense, right? Like study and time management habits. There's a lot of distractions in college and all of a sudden mom and dad aren't there to kind of be on top of them about making sure they get their homework done and choosing their schedule and figuring out what time classes are. So it's really important early on to develop good study and time management habits. Colleges work by email. Professors are not going to text students. So one of the things I do in my practice is I teach students, and it seems silly as adults, but to teach students how to use email and how to respond to it, and that they need to respond to it because acceptances are going to come through email. Professors are going to talk to them via email, and it's important to get in the habit early and make sure that they're using email and getting into that habit. The other thing about succeeding in college is that it's really important to kind of feed the other part of your life to make sure that you have balance. And I think it's important as you're thinking about college to make sure that you're doing the things that make you kind of an interesting person as opposed to just totally focus on academics. And that is, it's really good to be just reading for fun. I know a lot of students find it really difficult to do that. They're taking AP Lit and AP Lang, and unfortunately, those two classes tend to beat out of students the interest in reading for pleasure. So as parents, if you can encourage your student to read for pleasure, that will really help them a lot in college because there's a ton of reading in college. And the more that they're developing a good vocabulary, they're preparing themselves for that. Another thing is getting to know your teachers, teacher relationships in college. So your relationships with professors. There's research that's been done that says the most satisfying college experiences are those where a single professor or more than a single professor relationship has been developed. And students that had a close relationship with at least one professor said they were much more satisfied with their college experience, were much happier, much better prepared. And so it's good for students to start practicing now with high school teachers. High school teachers can be intimidating. They often, they often don't welcome students. There are some that I know that are just really, they're hard, but that's a good practice area for high school students to get to know how to talk to a teacher. It's pretty low risk, and I think it's a good thing for high school students to be doing to make sure they're advocating for themselves and they're developing a relationship. And then the last part of succeeding in college is colleges really want you to be not just an academic student, but they're looking for you to be part of their community. And so one great habit to get into now is, and this will serve you on into your life, is to think about how you might be able to make a difference in your community. And if you do that, you'll also be making your environment in college a much richer one, your experience there much more substantial, much more valuable to yourself, and you'll have a better experience when you are in college. So these are just some habits that right now a student could be developing that will make for a much better college experience once they get there. Okay. So I always think about college as really just, it seems like a huge thing, but it's, you know, it's going to be 4 years out of your much bigger life. It's an important decision, but it really is just one stop along the way. So that's my quick overview of the things that come up in my practice over and over again. But Gina's gonna see if you've got any questions. I'm happy to answer anything that might come up or that you had about the presentation or about anything else college related.